Hello everyone. I purchased this blue 24-inch M1 powered iMac a couple of days ago, and in today's video I'm going to try and answer a very simple question to the best of my ability. Is it still worth picking up one of these Macs in 2022, in nearly an entire year after its introduction, or are you better off waiting for a better product down the road? Let's try and find out. First, how did I end up buying the M1 24-inch iMac in 2022? Well, put simply, I was waiting for Apple to introduce a new display, which they did with their 27-inch Studio display. But when that thing launched locally, the 27-inch Studio display, which has no computer attached to it, is actually quite a bit more expensive than this 24-inch Apple display that has an entire computer built into it. So that kind of made the decision a bit of a no-brainer for me. I also managed to get a pretty good deal on this one because I bought it repackaged from an Apple authorized reseller. What does that mean? Well, simply put, somebody bought it before me, but then for whatever reason they decided to return it. The reseller just inspected it, found that everything is a-okay, put it back into the box, repackaged it as you will, and then slapped a 2-year warranty back on it and a $200 price discount and put it back on sale. So all in all, this 16GB RAM, 8-core GPU, 256GB storage blue model set me back $1,650. Considering that at initial launch this thing was well over $2,000, I'd still say I got a pretty decent deal. Luckily, the repackaged iMac is in pretty much perfect condition, and the same goes for the accessories. Now, the initial setup is as simple as for pretty much every other Apple product out there. You just need to enter your Apple ID, the Wi-Fi network details, register Touch ID, and you're good to go. And some initial impressions after using it for a couple of days, it looks really good in person. The design is really elegant and strikes me as being designed to be part of the environment around it rather than look like a standard computer. The white bezels do actually help with this, and I think MKBHD mentioned it in his review last year. Since most of the time this thing will have a white wall behind it, those white bezels will help it blend in. Now, the most heated arguments I've seen around the design refer to this part here, the chin, let's say, of the whole device, and this is actually the entirety of the computer. Everything that's related to the M1 is actually stored in this strip at the bottom of the display. And honestly, the discussion around this chin has been as intense as I've seen around the iPhone's notch, for instance, and I consider it just as irrelevant, to be honest. Personally, it hasn't really bothered me at all because when you're looking at the display, you tend not to notice it. Beauty really is in the eye of the beholder, but I wouldn't let this entire conversation about the chin discourage you from a potential purchase. As to the display itself, it really looks amazing. Content looks fantastic on it, giving even my mini LED iPad Pro a run for its money. While the peak brightness could be better at 500 nits, it's been more than enough even in my case with massive windows that shine light directly on the iMac display. All in all, the colors look absolutely amazing. This is a fantastic display in my honest opinion, and even if the raw spec sheet doesn't jump out at you, the in-person experience is honestly really good. Now, this being an all-in-one means that you don't need to buy any third-party peripherals to go with it. It has everything built in. The speakers are honestly pretty good and they're more than enough for typical usage. Of course, they're going to be eclipsed by dedicated external speakers, but at the end of the day, they're more than enough. Now, as to the webcam, I think it's actually pretty decent. Obviously, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of the new iPads, like it lacks center stage, for instance. And the microphone, while decent, it's not the best. Obviously, if you were gonna buy a 4K camera and an external microphone, they'd do a better job. But at the end of the day, this is perfectly fine for most Zoom calls, FaceTime calls, and that sort of stuff. I'm in a reasonably well-lit room, and I think the camera's doing a rather decent job at it. The keyboard is, for the most part, okay-ish, though kind of small for me, if I'm being totally honest. The key travel isn't fantastic, it's not backlit, and generally I feel it's a bit worse than the one on my 13-inch MacBook Pro, though it may also be a simple case of muscle memory on my part. On the flip side, the addition of built-in Touch ID makes the whole experience much better, both for quickly logging in, as well as making payments in apps, and so on. Now on to some quirks and peculiarities of the 24-inch iMac, and we're going to start with just that, the name. See, it's called a 24-inch iMac, but the display is actually 23.5 inches, not the 24 that the name implies. Well, I guess it sounds better to say 24-inch iMac than 23.5, so we'll let this one slide. The keyboard, while small, does have a hidden benefit in its diminutive size. It fits on the base of the iMac perfectly, allowing you to easily declutter your desk, which is pretty cool. The magnetic power cable itself is actually quite useful because if you would need to connect it entirely without the magnets assisting you, the space behind the stand is actually quite limited and you would have to fiddle around with it quite a bit. Nice touch there. Now to the Magic Mouse, which is almost as divisive in opinion as that whole chin situation from earlier. I generally find it cool to use. It's just the right size to allow you to hold it well. It's generally really well built and feels good in the hand. What has been made into a big issue is the charging port placement, which is actually on the bottom of the thing. Again, honestly, this isn't such a huge issue because charging this thing up for a few minutes will give you enough juice for about 8 hours of usage. So people have been blowing this a little bit out of proportion. Yeah, I agree the placement isn't ideal, but it's not going to bother you most of the time. What might end up bothering you a little bit more though, if you're into gaming for instance, is this thing doesn't have a traditional scroll wheel and the right click action is a little bit finicky. So if you intend to game a little bit more on this, I would suggest picking up a third-party dedicated mouse with traditional buttons on it. Oh, and a cool feature there, you can actually connect another Bluetooth mouse to the iMac while the Magic Mouse is actually still connected, so you end up with two mice connected to the same computer. Pretty neat, I didn't expect that one. Also a small word of caution for first-time Mac users such as myself. When you unbox this thing, make sure you turn on the keyboard and the mouse. I didn't, and I was kind of miffed they didn't work. In my defense though, the buttons that turn on both the Magic Mouse and the keyboard itself are actually tiny and not that all visible at all, so make sure you look for them and turn them both on before you turn on the iMac. Now, since both the mouse and the keyboard have a built-in battery that is recharged with the cable that Apple supplies in the box, you're going to need to know how often you need to do this, right? How can you actually check the state of charge for both the keyboard and the mouse? Well, Apple has built a way into macOS that allows you to do this, but it's a little bit more cumbersome than I would have thought. Basically, you have to go into System Preferences and then click on Mouse, and this shows you the charge percentage of the mouse. And again, going to the keyboard section in the System Preferences shows you the same percentage for the keyboard. But I mean, come on Apple, you pride yourself on user friendliness and usability. I'm sure you can come up with a smoother way to check this. I mean, it's a little bit fiddly, honestly. Also, did I mention that this thing is really thin? Like smartphone levels of thin. This is actually absolutely incredible, to be totally honest with you. Last and not least, when I set up this iMac, I had to enter the wireless password credentials myself. Usually when you buy a new iPhone or iPad, it's enough to just bring your existing iPhone or iPad close to the new one, and the wireless credentials will be passed on automatically based on your Apple ID, but that's not really the case here. Or maybe it just didn't work for me. Kind of a bummer there. Now to give a definite answer to the question I posed at the start of the video. Is the M1 powered 24-inch iMac launched in 2021 still worth buying in 2022? Now the biggest reason not to would be, well, the M1 chip itself, which was launched back in late 2020, meaning it's almost a year and a half old by this point, and in tech years, that's a very long time. We know that the successor to the M1, the M2 chip, will be announced later this year, but we just don't know really when, either at WWDC in June or maybe later in the autumn. However, nobody knows exactly when this particular iMac is going to get refreshed because, well, until then, Apple theoretically still has to launch a new Mac Pro powered by Apple Silicon, and I would imagine they would refresh the oldest M1 powered product they have on sale in their lineup, meaning a new MacBook Air and perhaps a new entry-level 13-inch MacBook Pro as well. Having said all of that though, I really don't think you should care about it that much at this point in time. This is a great product. Having used my 13-inch M1 powered MacBook Pro for well over a year at this point, I can tell you for a fact that the performance of the M1 is still rock solid for the scenarios that most people are going to be using it for. As such, the 24-inch M1 powered iMac is, in my honest opinion, still a very good candidate when it comes to a versatile home or office computer that is actually quite capable in terms of performance, doesn't take up a ton of space, has all of the accessories built in because it's an all-in-one design, offers a fantastic display, and surprisingly for an Apple product, doesn't break the bank while offering great value for money. So that pretty much sums it up for today. I hope I've answered the question whether this thing is still good in 2022. Spoiler, yeah, it still is. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you on the next one.